Welcome to RPV City Talk. RPV City Talk is brought to you by the City of Rancho Palos Verdes to inform the community on recent city matters. RPV City Talk is a weekly show that features the RPV mayor, city council, or city employees.
Thanks so much for joining us. Councilman Steve Wolowicz has gone from cowboy to accountant in his life while always keeping a passion for baseball and family front and center. I had a chance to sit down with our former mayor who tells us more. Steve, it's great to have you here and talk a little bit about your background and get to know you a little more personally.
Well, Maria, thank you for the opportunity. Sometimes people know enough about me, they say enough's enough, but I appreciate the
well, most people know about your political side and all your political aspirations here, but I know that you're retiring. We're going to get to that later, but let's go back a little bit. Your family is from Boston,
yes.
And in 1951 they came to California. What brought your parents to California then?
Same thing that brought a lot of folks here, the dawn of aerospace in Southern California.
Yes.
My dad was an aeronautical engineer.
Okay.
Matter of fact, after the war, he was teaching aeronautics, and they took this brain trust of people like him, and they all went out and started teaching, and they put together what was then NACA.
Right.
For all the technical folks here.
Yeah.
And then later on that transformed itself into NASA.
Yes.
And that has become, the rest is history. But he was in a very exciting time in aircraft.
Sure.
By the way, his idol was Charles Lindbergh because of airplanes and,
right.
and all that went with it. Mm-hmm. Later on, he liked building them. He got into aerospace, and it was a natural. And there was a group of these guys, and they plunked them all out in the middle of the desert. They took them from different spots in the United States, plunked them all out in Edwards Air Force, Edwards Flight Center.
Okay.
And they said make things fly, and that was it. We ended up living there wasn't enough housing, by the way, in the Antelope Valley at the time.
Can you believe that? It's just amazing to think that.
There are some apartment buildings there, I say this frequently, that I think are bigger than the entire community was. There was 8,000 people in the Antelope Valley when we moved there.
Wow.
And I think there are apartment buildings there that are that big now. But we lived in Mojave at the airport there. It was right after the war, and they still had barracks, and that's where we lived for a number of months until our house was built.
You talk about being an exciting time. I know that some of your father's friends were even mentioned in The Right Stuff, the book, yes. The Right Stuff.
Absolutely
yeah.
True. Many of the test pilots, and by the way, we lived on the outskirts of town, and we watched the town grow out to us.
Wow.
But some of the people that he would have over for dinner would be, or that he'd work with, indeed were mentioned in Tom Wolfe's book. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting here reading the book, and I say, well, I know these folks. And a number of the test pilots that were there. Matter of fact, some issues were made about Scott Crossfield recently. He passed away a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I remember Mr. Crossfield coming to the house for dinner. I remember Joe Walker. I remember, by then Chuck Yeager had left, and then later on he came back.
Right.
People always ask me about that. But I have photographs with my dad in front of a lot of pretty high-tech stuff. The X-15 was a big deal for him.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because it must have been such a small family of people, because like you said, it was the time when it was all exploding, you know, it
yes.
was happening, and everybody probably knew everybody. Yes,
your phrase is correct, but we tried we tried not to use the word exploding.
Exploding is probably the wrong word.
Yeah, but certainly it was that way.
Expanding.
It was expanding. It was
yeah.
certainly exciting. I had a chance to recall some of these thoughts, and as kids going to school, we would know the sonic booms.
Right, yes, I remember that.
You could tell the sound of sonic boom.
Sure.
Every now and then, and I mentioned this at one of my high school reunions to a couple of friends, I said, we could tell sonic booms, and we could differentiate them from when a plane would auger in and crash. And I said, kids don't think about that kind of thing. You
right.
just say, yeah, is that, no, that one's okay, that's just a sonic boom. But nevertheless, it reminded us all about how exciting and dangerous it was to get these things going. But he was involved with aerospace at that time, and a lot had happened. So that's you don't think about it as a kid, by the way.
You don't, of course not, because it's just part of your life, and that's just the way you grew up. You know.
Right.
Now, did you ever want to be an astronaut? Do you have aspirations when you were very young, or?
Well, I think it was a little bit like learning about what I couldn't do in sports later on. Somebody put their arm around me and said, "I don't think so." All those folks, and we met them. We met a lot of them did live in our neighborhoods, and they were test pilots at the time.
Sure.
So there's a certain element of danger. You learn that growing up, and a lot of people in the service was a good source for engineers,
sure.
and a lot of them were very highly trained. And I think my dad started seeing my mathematical capabilities went so far, and he said, maybe we can find something else for you.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because you also had a ranch and you had horses and cattle.
Yep.
So was that something that you really enjoyed doing, or?
Yes,
Okay.
As a matter of fact, but to correct everything, first of all, we lived in the country, but it was a house.
Right.
And where I could have extra space, there was just desert.
Yep, absolutely.
I did raise cattle. I had my own horses, and normally I kept them at neighbors.
Okay.
You know, they'd be set up to be able to do that. So it was quite a dichotomy, and I wasn't the only one. I mean, there were others from who had engineers as dads. Discovered agriculture. It was kind of neat. I mean, you're out in the country.
Sure.
And that's where we spent our summertime working. Matter of fact, getting ready for my retirement, I came across a photograph my dad took, and it was my first paycheck. Now, I'd been working on ranches and farms, but always, you know, you get a couple bucks here and a couple bucks there. I actually had a paycheck. And I thought about that. That was the start of my career. I was not quite 15, and I was fortunate for being a little bit bigger for my age. So I was the guy who got to drive the tractor.
Wow.
Now, I figured it out. I probably knocked over more fence posts and did more damage with that tractor than that first paycheck. But it was a great environment to grow up in.
Absolutely.
You could indeed. I mean, you loaded hay. You did what you took care of livestock. Great opportunity. That era has kind of moved by.
Sure.
The hometown that I grew up in, and by the way, I'm reminded about that. Hometown I grew up in, when I moved away, went to college, no longer exists because it grew.
Wow.
And it's not quite the same place.
Now, how about your mom? Did your mom stay at home? Was she working?
My mom was as talented as my dad was. She was. Wrong place to be, by the way, when you're a fashion buyer.
Yeah, in the Antelope Valley.
Middle of the desert. But she was also very well known for her artistic capabilities. She was an artist of the first order, and she sold a number of her paintings. We still have some of them.
Wow.
I don't have any of her artist scenes. I mean, her desert scenes. But nevertheless, she was very, very talented. But her need to be within her environment, that was not the Antelope Valley. And so my parents ended up divorcing when I was 5th or 6th grade, something like that.
Okay.
But nevertheless, it still turned out okay. She moved to San Francisco. I would visit, and I got to see a little bit of both worlds. But I was reminded about the fact later on, and I could start then comparing what it's like to be in a small town.
Well, very true, and you've lived a lot of different lives in your life, which is interesting, because some people grow up in one place, they stay there their whole life, they don't ever kind of branch out. So it's interesting that, like you said, you had that experience.
Yes,
You
yes.
know.